asked me, Mike and Jen asked me to do something on literacy for students with significant disabilities, which is like, 5 days worth of material. So let's jam pack it into 1 hour, and we'll see what we do. Hopefully we'll be able to cover some things that are new to you. I've kind of taken a new perspective of not just about giving you like all the things that possibly I do or my colleagues do, but why? Why are we involved in this idea of literacy for all, as it's kind of taken the nation, with the book from Dr. Karen Erickson and Dr. David Koppenhaver, and how everybody's really upping their game on literacy for all students. For those of you that don't know me, I think of hi everybody out there. My name's Kelly Fonner. I do training and consulting in educational and assistive technology. Mike Murata always gets me kind of ramped up, and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat, so people might be doing some introductions as to where you're from, because I know not everybody online here is from New Hampshire, and I think people would be surprised to see that we've got people all across different time zones. So again, thank you for joining us. My background is as a special education teacher. I primarily have worked with kids with physical challenges all of my career, but then along with that comes everything else. And so as a teacher, I've taught in early childhood. I've taught transitional kindergarten, but not quite ready for primetime players. And kindergarten, I've taught in K-6, skipped over middle school as a full-time teacher. Bless all the people that have lived in middle school, and then taught high school students. I, for the last 25 years, though, have been more in a consultative role. I've worked at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and for other university projects, but I mostly do consultation to schools and programs, and I do a lot of training. In the last 3 years, I've also picked up my teacher role again. So you're going to be seeing some of my students that I am a virtual member of their team. And really a lot of the work that I'm doing hits this, both reading and writing and access to literacy for students who have, a real variety of significant challenges. And so I figure, if I can do it, you certainly can do it too. That is for sure. So again, this idea, this perspective that we're in, and you'll see this statement here from the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies that has really done a lot of leading of the way of getting us access and being an influence for reading and writing. And hopefully you're looking at in the chat and you're seeing that we have people from Pennsylvania, my original teaching state. We have people from here in Wisconsin, where I find myself now. And then, of course, people from warmer weather. So thanks all for joining us. I've put in just some statements that help set that tone and perspective, is that really, we have to have that flair of all children can learn. I know it. I'm here to help that happen. That kids don't have to prove to me how they learn. I'm a part of figuring it out, right? And all the different ways in which we can learn and be involved in that learning. I'm sure many of you have been through trainings in universal design for learning. So we're looking at all those multiple means of representation and engagement and all of those pieces. And so that comes to the literacy table as well. And we recognize that we have barriers. I go back to the Buchelman and Miranda, now the Buchelman and Light book, and always am looking at what are the things that help us look at the barriers? What are the things that help us kind of attack the barriers? But recognizing that there are policy barriers. So there's policy barriers that impact us in literacy. So things about, where do your materials come from? What curriculum are you following? What are the common practice barriers? And it might be that there are some practices from the past that we need to let go of because we know better now. We know more, and we don't just do it because that's the way we used to do it. Attitudinal barriers about what people think about students and their learning abilities. I've had a wonderful opportunity these last 2 school years to work with general educators as they serve a student who has pretty significant challenges, a student with Rett syndrome, that none of them have ever had a student with Rett syndrome in their classroom before. And I love that they have no preconceptions and that we are just moving right along in the 5th and 6th grade curriculum. And this student has learned so much in these last 2 years, doing a lot of it virtually because of health issues and distance to teacher issues. So, but we have the people that have the knowledge on how to teach. They have the skills on how to teach, and we're applying it, quite possibly to students that they have never worked with before. But we have what I like to refer to as the E's. Donna McNair, who many of you know is a vision teacher from Minnesota, but so much more than that. And so Donna and I, we like to consider ourselves as thought partners. And we talk a lot about this idea of expectations. So I've kind of built this information on literacy and looking at literacy for everybody by really going through it from our perspective, from the educator's perspective, adds to our 7th E, that we're looking at being really expected. So that we are expecting that literacy and teaching literacy is at all levels. You know, I know that many people are getting involved in literacy at that emergent level, but recognize that not everybody is still there. I've had several students that all we needed to do was introduce literacy, and we were bang right up into the transitional level. So recognizing whether you follow this kind of a structure or you have another structure that you're following, that not everybody from the moment that you're starting with them is at emergent, but at the very minimum, they are. I like to say that nobody is lower than emergent. We are all of our students are at the very least at the emergent. There isn't any kind of test you have to give them or any kind of barrier that they have to cross or anything that they have to prove to you that they are not emergent. And so I will have people that will say, oh no, that's too much for my students. No, it's not. It might be too much for you. Right, there's the question. Is it too much for you? Because you haven't figured out yet. That's why we have to be expectant, right? Again, a lot of book studies. Alyssa Warren is doing a book study on Facebook around comprehensive literacy for all. There are state groups and projects doing that. And I think these are my big takeaways as I've made my way through the book several times now. And we'll talk about these 10 success factors towards the end of our hour. But is that we need to teach these things skillfully. We don't just like throw activities at the wall like spaghetti and see what sticks, right? We've got to be very, we're exploring new areas with some students. We are working towards kids acquiring conventional literacy skills, right? And we adapt our process along the way. We adapt the materials that they're using, but we're following that kind of process of getting from emergent through transitional into conventional skills. We need to make sure that we are organized in our delivery. And if you're like where you're a team member, where you've got multiple people, you split it up and you keep it together. Where are we doing and what are we building on? One of my online students, we have 3 teachers that are teaching different components of literacy with that young adult student who we are working with to bring her along to conventional literacy. So, it really take a look if you haven't taken a look at any of the Facebook groups so that you can get engaged in that process. So I want to share with you some videos of my students for that expectation, as well as some videos that I've pulled down from other people's students and other places that we've learned. So this is the student that I was speaking about who, when I first met her 3 years ago, and she was a beginning fourth grader, was doing things like colors and shapes in her full-time resource room, and exploded when the pandemic hit and other teachers came on board, and other teachers with other expectations for her. And so in the area of literacy, we're doing sequential phonics, and we're working on that. So you'll see a little bit of here. You're going to see another video or two of her to get an idea of Creedy. And I thank Creedy and her family for allowing me to share these videos with you all. So she is a student with Rett syndrome. We're working our way through sequential phonics. This is a lesson that we did
new.
We'll do something new. I'm just going to pause it to orient you to the screen. The two screens on the left, so this is my capture from Zoom, are of she and her mom. So this is Creedy and her mother, who acts as a facilitator for her during, and as a support person for her during some of her lessons. And because I'm also involved with her communication system, I'm modeling. So the two screens on the right are from me. So what you're seeing here, and then also a screenshot from my document camera, because at this point we're using a physical communication book. So that's just posted right over here on my left from my document camera. And then I get to see what's going on at Creedy's desk at home. Would you like to do a new writing? Or something new with letters?
First choice. Okay. Second choice.
You'll see a
You tell
picture
us,
of this
Mrs. Kelly.
choice
She's
board
ready to
and a
listen.
couple of screenshots.
New letters.
New letters. So she often chooses which
All right.
going to do.
She also looked at check and try, new letters, touched it and said, I'm taking a guess.
Okay. Let's do something new. Getting a lot of buffering today. With letters. IGNSW.
That sounds right.
All right, letter
New.
Yes, new one. There. So she's confirming. Back. OPQRST. In many cases, I
OPQRST.
Yeah. S. You'll hear her electronic alphabet system. So part of the expectation is that everybody
the letter
alphabet.
S. It's a consonant. OPQRST S.
Part of the setup of the activity is a part of the activity where we do a lot of letter review and letter sound as we're pulling the letters that we're going to be using during our making words activity.
Mom's showing you
more
S.
of this later.
And then we have one more letter.
But my expectations right from the beginning is that she's going to use the alphabet. She didn't have to prove to me that she knew every letter and every sound before we started working on activities. We review them, we go back, but she'd been doing letters and sounds since she was really young. I had a third grader. There are certain expectations that I start from that we don't start over again just because I'm the new teacher on her particular case. But what we're doing over time is finding out what it is that she's solid in and where it is that we need to have other practices. So that expectation that everybody's going to use the alphabet to write. Meet another one of my online students. This is Mason. Mason is, I think in this video, he's 10. He is someone that nobody has ever shown the alphabet to him before. because they didn't have those expectations for him. He has an alphabet in his communication book, and we are starting to use it. And I'm showing his parents in this video how to get it started. We're 1 week into the shutdown, if you see the date on here.
Still, yes, one of those. Hurry up. Oh, Mason, I don't know. You're building.
All right, so here, let me orient you to Mason and his mom, Leslie. Leslie has a partner-assisted scanning book. And so Mason indicates to her as she scans through it. Again, just because somebody's access is more difficult, or they access in a non-touching way, doesn't mean that we don't have the same expectations. We've just got to figure out what's the best way to get them to the alphabet. And so for Mason at this point, the best way to get to the alphabet was for somebody to partner scan it for him.
Still, yes, one of those. Hurry up. Oh, Mason, I don't know. You're building a good one. Something's wrong. Uncomfortable. Food and drink.
Mason's
Hurry
expecting
up.
to go to lunch.
Is that what you're saying? Hurry up? Are you saying hurry up? Should we be hurried up so you can get some food? Yeah, 51A. There you go. There, Mommy found your letters. There we go. Look, there's your letters.
So
And then what
another
Miss Kelly's going to do is switch over to something. Oh, man. Yeah, 51A. There you go.
Is having parents be a part of the process, right? That I'm not just expecting to do the teaching, but that we're all in this together, and especially in this kind of a format and with these kinds of opportunities. I'm going to fast forward here so that just you see a little bit of how we get things up on the screen.
Oh, look here, Maves. Look what Kelly's got. Oh, they need to be bigger.
What you see on the right-hand side is what his mother wrote as a model.
Yes, you are.
And what he produced.
Yes. We're going to look at our letters.
Are we going to spell something?
You're going to write like we did before? All right. So we'll start scanning and see what letters you pick to write about your topic. We're going to write about looking. Actions, look. Okay, are you ready? Things you like to look at. Okay, ready? A, B, C, D, E. One of those. No. F, G, H, I, J. One of those.
Mason is tricky with his access. Do not be thinking that he's answering a yes or no.
K, L, M, N, O. One of those.
He has a cortical vision impairment, so she's scanning aloud.
P, Q, R, S, T. One of those.
While she's pointing to the letters.
Oh. Was that a yes? Yes. Okay, great.
Like
You
now.
chose P, Q, R, S, T. All right, ready?
So he'll
P?
interrupt you.
Yes. P. Our first letter.
Right.
P. 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 Okay, ready? Now we're ready for our second letter. A, B, C, D, E. One of those. You're touching your book. A.
Now, expected-wise, we are just playing with letters at this point. Mason spelled a word, and then we found a picture to go along with this word that he spelled. And I think it was right in the food theme. So again, he was being very expected. So let's talk a little bit more about expectations. I expect that my students have access to a library. Yours? Do they have physical access, visual access, auditory access? Are there books provided that are at a variety of reading levels and a variety of interest levels? These are the things to be thinking about. Making sure you don't have to just recreate the library in your classroom, but expect that the library in the neighborhood, the library in the school are accessible to all students. And as a teacher, that's something I really talk about. Engaging our students. So the second E in this process is getting students engaged and getting people around the students. Many of you I know are in positions such as I am, where you're consulting to the people who are working directly to students. So working with their engagement. And, it's not that I sit down and teach everybody all of the components of universal design for learning, but we do focus on certain areas. And when I'm looking at how do they have multiple ways of action and expression of what it is that they know. So we move, around within this framework. If this is new to you, you've got a link here where you can take a look at the materials from CAST and maybe sign up for the summer workshop. We get people engaged in a variety of materials. I have some students, like Mason, that get engaged when materials have a tactual item to them. Now, for some students, we're looking at, and you'll see a Braille reader here in a couple of screens, we're looking at materials that have Braille, that have texture, about engaging students in what's coming and understanding and background knowledge. Many of you are into 3D printing, and there's information on 3D printing of tactile books and tactile maps. When I think of some of my older students and we're looking at like where Buck went in the Call of the Wild, and we follow the map through Alaska, and we can do that with a tactile graphic. Looking at materials that are available. So things like Unite for Literacy, where you have books that have an auditory component that are presented in multiple languages, that have images that aren't too cartoonish. But you'll see a pretty robust library in topics that I can build background knowledge. We want to engage students not just in reading, but in writing. For some of my students, writing is much more concrete than reading. Reading is a little bit more abstract to take in when you're starting to do it yourself, but writing is very hands-on. It can be very tactual in those places, and it can get students engaged with literacy sometimes earlier than when they show any interest or joint attention in reading, even though we continue to do that. And so here's a video from my colleague Donna McNair, where she has some students that she was working with from very young, some babies that are blind, and engaging them in scribbling like we would a 9-month-old or a year-old or a 13-month-old who was sighted, that might be scribbling with crayons and markers and all the finger paints and things that we scribble with. And we look at this idea of playing with the mark maker of your future. So you see a little video here. Maybe some of you seen this when Donna and I've done scribbling workshops, that Ethan is a big star of those.
I didn't play with somebody before.
A little bit. You're doing good, Ethan.
Yeah.
So let me orient you to the video. You've seen a little smidgen of it. So this is called a Mountbatten Brailler. Now, this is the Mountbatten Brailler from 10 years ago. It's been redesigned, and there are other tools on the market as well. Ethan is at his home on the floor. His mother is behind him, just like we might see other kids play with writing tools with a family member. You'll also hear his older brother who's chatting up. But what I want you to watch is how Ethan explores his writing tool and the written work, the written Braille that he produces, that he is scribbling with the keys, not necessarily hitting the sets, of dot 1, dot 2 to create a letter, but he is scribbling with things that will eventually become his writing tool.
Yeah. Now you're done, Daddy?
Outside.
You can go get your sandals on and go play in the bed.
Oh.
When Dawn is gone.
Oh, I love that. What's in your bed?
Enter key.
Yeah.
Back tab. Back tab. Back tab.
So it's saying back tab. I know the captioning's not picking that up.
There you go.
Ethan. Ethan Donna.
But that exploration time with the tools of literacy are so important. I think sometimes, when we look at time as being a critical factor, that we don't always take the time to go through the process. And yet, look at how wonderful this is, that he is exploring the keys, he's hearing the feedback features, he's feeling the braille dots. All of those things didn't need to be taught to him prior to be given access. So a part of engagement is access. That as we work on access, and I have students that we're working with switch access while we're engaging them in literacy, so that we are figuring out the tools of literacy. So which materials work best for their listening to books, which switch interfaces and switches work best for him, while we're engaging them in self-chosen reading. So we want to build curiosity. We don't want to stymie that. We really want to motivate students for looking and learning. And when we have students, as you see here in this picture of a student with low vision, I don't want to immediately take all visual materials away. I want to make sure that they still are fascinated by things that are presented visually, even though that auditory component may be a big feature in their literacy future. So I want to have high expectations for all of my students in the development of both reading and writing skills. Because what we know is that how do we move forward if we just continue to stay where we are? We're just waiting I run into people that are waiting for kids to prove themselves. And you're like, what are you waiting for? Like, get moving. Our kids do not have time for you to waste, is the way I always look at it. So the next E is effort. You gotta put in some effort. After all, it is work, right? This is our work. So our work takes effort. And hopefully you find that effort, as I do, challenging and fun. And so we put effort into learning and using the most recent information based upon another E, evidence. We don't want to accept things like that's the way we've always done it. Or I don't think that this student will be able to learn to read and write. Let's just teach them, to cook. Not that cooking is a bad thing to learn. I don't want to blast any of that, because we also need to read to be able to learn to cook on our own. But I don't want to take them out of that idea of that zone of they're going to be able to read. So part of our effort is exploration, being able to look at different types of book adaptations. Think about all of the workshops that you've given or you've gone to that talk about the different representations of books, different access to books. This is the effort that we put into figure out. I don't have to have all of my ducks in a row before I begin to have a student accessing books. They're accessing books and they are a part of the process of figuring out what kind of screen reader might work best for them. What kind of access to turning pages works best for them. I've tried to sit down and put together what seems to be like the newest bells and whistles and present that package. And I've had a kid then turn to the side and then use a dowel to turn the pages. And you're like, okay, well, guess I should have started with you, which is really the basis of all assistive technology is function. So look at that. Part of your effort might be exploring things that are free. And taking a look at going back to CAST and taking a look at some of the materials that are there on the reading and the writing area, where they give you some examples. They give you some things that people have done already that you can build upon. And so, there's so many products that fit into electronic literacy and electronic reading and writing. But, finding a zone to get started in, to feel comfortable with the features, and then expand out upon that. So I don't want to say that these three things are magical. I just want to say that these are places that if this is all new to you, these are some places to start that have some research behind them and that have people that can assist you as you get started. Look at those kinds of things that are being used by the people that are doing presentations, by the people that are writing the books, by the people that are gathering resources. Tar Heel Reader has been around for a long time. I want to say that are we at 20 years yet? And I love Darla put in the chat, that Tar Heel Reader saved my life last year with a student. There are so many different topics that are in Tar Heel Reader. If you're unfamiliar with Tar Heel Reader, go to the website. You can search for books. If you want to start reading books, we need to give you the code to get you in. They don't give the code out to everybody because then all the bots break in and write crazy books. But there's pretty much a topic, whatever topic I'm on with a student, we can find something here in Tar Heel Reader. If you have students that you also are working with that use communication systems, you'll also see that the symbols are available in Shared Reader to talk about. The symbols are not there for you to reproduce the words. There is no representation of a symbol per word to essentially read the book via symbols. That's not an evidence-based strategy. It was a practice for a long time, but it's one of those practices that, boy, we're pulling people kicking and screaming out of the practice of over-symbolizing this. And I'm going to say yes to Darla. The same thing that putting an effort into reading is putting an effort into writing. Writing is one of my most favorite things to do as a teacher because it is so concrete, and kids, you see leaps and bounds that they make with writing, and so many resources that we can use to get them started with writing and to move forward through the writing process. And again, it's about exploring and using, and not the search for the ultimate right tool. Let it go. Like, jump in and use something and use it through all of the features that it has, and then start exploring for other types of features. We see people, I'm a part of the Quiet Leadership team, and we'll see people, post on Quiet questions of what's the best tool for a kid with blah, blah, blah. And it's not necessarily that tools, if you've been in assistive technology more than a nanosecond, that tools are not matched to disability. They might have been created with certain challenges physically, visually, auditorily in mind, but we need to see what are the best features that work for different students so that we can educate all, right? So that idea of literacy for our students with really significant challenges isn't just about the tools, but you need to be teaching skills with those tools. I find and get introduced to children through their families who have come to workshops where all people have been doing is working on the tool, teaching them to hit that switch. Well, what were they doing with the switch? What were they accessing? You know, the same cause and effect games that they've been doing since they were a year and a half old, they're still doing at 15? Or are they using that switch to access reading materials? Are they accessing YouTube videos? What are they accessing that makes motivational and meaningful sense for it? Not just to use a tool to use it, but what is the function that it's providing? What is that opportunity? So as we're educating students, what are the activities of literacy? And these are pulled out of the Literacy for All book. These activities are pulled out of other curricula that myself and the teachers that I work with follow. So there isn't, again, it's not the magical list of activities that you should be doing, but recognizing that there are activities and components of activities that work best with different levels, both in reading, and you'll see another one of these lists in activities for writing. But know why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Not just because doing repeated line stories was a practice that people have and they love and you just change it up, but because it builds certain skills in early readers, that it builds sight words in early readers so that they can use those to start transitioning into reading themselves and not being read to. Educate kids with effective educational strategies, teaching strategies. There's a wonderful set of videos from the Iowa Department of Education. This is just one example from those videos.
It's time for our word wall, and today is Monday, so we're going to learn new words today. New words. Does anybody know what this word is? Her. That's right. You said it. You did. How many letters in the word her?
H-E-R.
How many letters?
H-E-R.
1,
2, 3.
3. Good. 3. H-E-R. Her. I'm going to put her up on the word wall so we'll have one to look at. What letter does it go under?
H.
H. We need to make room for her. Okay. Her. Okay, are we ready? We're going to clap it first, and then we're going to chant it. Get your hands up. Show me you're ready. You ready, Yana Lou? Okay, let's go. H-E-R.
Her.
H-E-R. Her. Okay, let's chant it.
So, and a lot of times people have heard of some of these activities. They might have heard of a word wall. They might have heard of the activities that you do when you introduce your 5 new words for the word wall, but they might not have seen it in action. And if you're a teacher like I am, I like to see somebody doing it. I'd like a good model myself. And so again, take a look at the videos from Iowa. They go across the areas of literacy, following the principles of literacy for all.
It's time.
And again, the same thing, taking a look, and I had mentioned the idea about using symbols. Symbols are for talking, words and letters are for writing and reading. But we know that symbols may support comprehension. They may support understanding. So we're not looking at saying that symbols have to be completely removed from everything that you do with literacy, but using them thoughtfully, using them so that they aren't interfering with children recognizing words, children recognizing letters, that I might use a picture to anchor an idea about what I'm writing about, right? I'm not using pictures as my means of writing. I'm using pictures to anchor my thoughts, to keep me on maybe on track with what it is that I'm writing. If I'm thinking about doing vocabulary maps, maybe it might be helpful to have some of the ideas that we're working in vocabulary mapping represented with an image. And then of course, many of us are involved in images all the time. You know, how many things have you been in this, you know, maybe just today that you've used an emoji. So it's not that symbols are totally ripped from our work, but using them purposefully. So we do emoji writing, you know, so we come up with topics and ideas that we talk about, and we do emoji writing as an activity. I also have in some of my high school students that we talk about proofreading, and I kind of grabbed this proofreading symbol chart off of something from a high school I was working at a couple years ago, and thinking about what are the symbols that we use in editing with that, and how can we use those. Educate our students by connecting reading strategies to listening strategies. For so many of our complex students with complex learning needs, we look to auditory presentation of text. So that auditory representation, but it isn't just now listen to it. I need to be teaching strategies, the same strategies that I do for my visual print processors, activating their prior knowledge, building background information, making connections. All of these things are practices that are supported by the National Reading Panel that look not just at visual print processors, but also auditory processors. And I think too often we try to replace print with auditory listening and just think that, oh, well, they can hear well, so they're going to be able to listen well. And I have the same kids that struggle with visual print processing of reading, struggle with auditory processing of reading, that it isn't, you know, just the answer, give them a book in an audio format, but to make sure that you are teaching skills to go along with it. And I'm sure that some of you have other places that you get auditory support for reading. If you want to put those things in chat, I'm sure the other people on the webinar with us here would appreciate any of those places that you go to for audio supported reading materials and information on teaching audio supported reading. As I mentioned, there was going to, during the list on activities for reading, there's also a list of activities for writing. This certainly is not a fully comprehensive list, but things that I'm sure that you're familiar with. What do we do with emergent writers to do and use mark making? You know, what do we do with early writers? You know, so that we start to move their writing into having meaning, right? Being able to share that writing is something that I'm sharing with, that kind of transitioning those activities into writing for multiple purposes and brainstorming. Just before I was on this webinar, I was watching a webinar from Dr. Caroline Musselwhite, who was talking about, you know, motivational writing activities. It's probably part of the reason that I'm all keyed up, because, you know, Caroline has a speed at which only Caroline can go at. And I love her dearly for it. And she's taught me a lot as a teacher. And so, you know, she's talking about writing bookmarks and writing postcards to characters and stories that you're reading, and all other types of forms of writing, that writing, like reading, isn't just about reading or writing narrative, but that it is about making lists and reading those lists. I mean, that's part of that writing process is putting words in a list, whether it's horizontal or vertically. But I think for some reason we all think, oh, well, when are they going to write their first sentence? Not recognizing that there are many stages that we go through before we get to that first sentence. You know, I need to have and support kids through that early writing process. So that idea of scribbling with those mark makers of your future. Here's a little video from some middle school teacher that is working with students trying to work on their writing and using the first author curriculum.
Woo, being a fearless writer. That's one of my favorite mini lessons, actually. A
around the world, these students have never been expected to write because they present with huge cognitive challenges, many of them. Many of them can't use words to communicate. And so the first author writing curriculum was developed to give these students with access to writing instruction that's similar to what's used in general education classrooms. The author's chair was designed to be a special place where all students can share their writing and everybody in the room can celebrate what they did that day.
They have a collection of their writing. They're celebrated in author's chair. And with each other, they're excited to see the topics that their friends pick about.
They love it because they have a platform to share their writing, things that they chose, things that they're passionate about, and they get accolades from their peers.
What's beautiful about author's chair is they really see why they're writing. You know, they're like, this is why I do it. You know, it's hard, but I get to go in this chair and I'm the star. So I think.
Whoops, and I think that we forget about the celebration piece. We forget the purpose of writing. We think about writing to just get to the next stage of writing versus what's our end goal for students to be able to write about the things that they want to share. You know, it's another communication strategy is writing. And so you've got links here that you can go and find out more about first author at the Building Wings Company. And it's, you know, remembering that progress would be impossible if we always did things the way we used to, right? It's just, it's about making some change in your practice or helping somebody else make change in their practice so that we can evaluate and we can make decisions on effective strategies. We can make decisions upon effective tools, that we're not just taking data so that it can go into the round file or data that I can put in a report at the end of the school year, but that I can find out information so that I'm making sure that what we're doing is really working and generating progress for a student. Of course, there's many different ways that we look at evaluation in assistive technologies. How many of you are familiar? Could you raise a hands? How many of you are familiar with the SET framework from Dr. Joy Zabala, who contributed so much to our field as she had us look at tools from that perspective of what's the task that you're going to be doing before we start looking at that tool and connecting tasks to purposes and the pieces and all of those components. So really taking a look at, you know, building this pyramid, if you will. I once went to a wonderful presentation of a 16-year-old who had multiple complexities to the things that got him through the day. And what he talked about at the very top of his pyramid was his communication abilities to communicate with the staff and the revolving staff about the kinds of things that needed to be done for him, so that he wasn't just being done to, but done for. And then as he worked his way down his pyramid, he got to kind of the things of the writing tools, the things that helped supported him to read. But so much of the things at the top of his pyramid were about the tasks that made him a social being within them, had him become a literate being within his school and community. You know, I started out talking about barriers, and that's another thing to evaluate and take a look at continually. So I just kind of copied a page out of that Buchelman and Light book that, you know, what are the kinds of barriers that we're running into? Are they just about access? Are they about opportunity? Are they about things that are becoming barriers for students' level of independence? You know, this might be something to take a look at as you're trying to evaluate that and moving through, you know, stages of levels of independence. Of course, evaluating tools, a not as often used component of the SET framework is the B page. And so here, and I tend to use this more, where we're looking at features of tools and making decisions. And like I said, I'm not trying to figure out what's going to be the best thing before we get started, but we're figuring it out by trialing and using free things or things that our school or materials or tools that our school district has purchased site licenses to. Let's see which of these features work best for the student when we're doing independent reading, when we're doing reading skill building, when we're doing writing, when we're doing independent writing, when we're doing writing to demonstrate comprehension. Those kinds of measures can help throughout, as well as looking at some of the tools that were built for specific purposes. So we know that, and several of you do presentations on products like UPAR. So looking at that protocol for reading and being able to see which is going to be the best way, whether I'm reading to myself, whether I'm reading electronically, whether I'm using a human reader, so that I can show that by measurable hard data, not just that somebody, he likes it better when people read to them. We have so many squishy things that happen in assistive technology that it's good to know that there are tools out there. If you haven't explored some of the writing assessment tools, Bridget Nicholson has been expanding her writing tools and her supports into looking at even the differences between speech recognition and recording, and looking at those as measures of writing, and then building upon that as students produce written work. So, make sure as you're evaluating that you're really trying to figure out, what are you evaluating? Are you trying to diagnose so that we might start something new? Are you doing a formative assessment to kind of gauge where a student may be in the process? Are we looking at benchmarking as we're working towards skill that we're building? Are we looking at summative reporting? I think it's really important that people understand what type of evaluations am I using, what things might be missing from this package. And then I'm not talking about overly testing students, but what are you kind of data are you keeping, and what is that data getting you to? What kinds of data is built in tools? Some of you are using Retopia. Built into Retopia are 6 different measures of emergent skills. That is a checklist. So it's not necessarily something that, it's something that I can use formatively. I can be something I can benchmark along the way. I have people that use this in quarterly reporting. Some of you are using the unique series. Look to see what is it that you're using and how am I showing skills, and where am I showing where we might be missing certain skills and building. Showed you the video on the developmental writing scale, which is a part of First Author. And so looking at this as an example from one of my students, as I looked at her writing all across last school year, what levels of all the samples that we had of her writing, how much of her writing fell into these different levels. And then we were able to use that evaluatively to say, okay, these are now the kinds of lessons that we need to be working on to have more lessons appear up in that, the highest level for her last year was level 6. So writing 2 or 3 intelligible words. How do we start to get those words into lists? How do we start to create those lists into sentences? All right, and as always happens, we're running out of time, but this idea of checking in on students. Let me play one last video here. Michael cut me off. So here's this word. Okay. There it is, a little bit bigger and a different color. Yeah, here it is in a sentence with other words that you know. We're making short sentences with words that you know. That's a word we're working on.
Doing good?
Yep.
All right. Find the word if.
And touching it.
Whoa, and a touch. Wow. The word if.
So, we're not doing these check-ins every lesson.
So here,
having that ability to check in of it. And then, of course, to exhibit. The last thing is sharing those results. Sharing the results of what students have learned. I have a nice link for you here of kids celebrating their writing. How you keep that to demonstrate it, to print it out. I do a lot of Google slide decks of the written work for my students so we can look at that over the course of the year. But the key in all of this is making sure that you're asking questions that help you discover what a student is capable of knowing, not just to show what they don't know. I think we don't try and go at it from a negative end, but we really try and change that perspective to what is our purpose of asking questions. We want to discover what it is that they know or the things that we're moving into for them to know. So I mentioned in the beginning, I would end up here with these 10 elements that are those elements of success that you can read about more in Comprehensive Literacy for All book. But all of these things, making sure they're a part of your literacy practice with all of your students. And you'll see that they're not all just about lessons. It is about having high expectations. It is about encouraging risk-taking. And sometimes that encouragement isn't just of the students, but it's of you and your staff. So thanks for spending this very quick hour with me. I'm going to turn it back to Mike and the New Hampshire team. See if we have any time for other comments for people to add.
Thanks, Kel. Of course we have time. You said I would cut you off and I wrote in the chat, no, I won't. I would just let you keep talking. And I don't have anything else scheduled for the rest of the day, so I'm good.
Oh, there we go. We're on the mic time.
That's right. It's all bonus time at this point. Questions from anybody? Things to ask Kelly, comments, anything at all?
Other takeaways that you all have from Comprehensive Literacy for All?
I love the 10 parts of it. It's just, it's such a great, and the way you had it was even better. The way I really like that visual of just right there and reminding people that this is something that is so simple, and it's probably things people are doing all the time, but never see it maybe in a larger kind of outlay of that information all in one view. Melanie says she finally needs to read her book. Melanie, you do. Now you just added something to your to-do list.
Melanie, sure. I will tell you, I only got to chapter 4 for such a long time. And then I just kind of forced myself. I think it was round 4 of Alyssa's book study to get myself through the whole book. Oh yeah, Darla, the access to the whole alphabet. And oh my goodness, the barriers that people put in that way of kids getting access to the alphabet. Oh, well, they don't know all their letters. I don't care. Like my 2.5-year-old granddaughter didn't know all of her letters before she was like coloring and scribbling. And so she could write anything she wanted to write. Yeah, and a lot of it is you just need to do it. I think that these 10 things, these are good educational practices. It's not like, not a lot of them are great, big, revelations. I think that the significant time allocation to literacy was a revelation to many people because I think people get overly concerned about time on task. And they think that you're doing one kind of literacy lesson for 20 or 25 minutes. I have for my students, one of the students that I have, we only see each other for 30 minutes. That's about the energy level. And we might do 3 different things during that time. I'm not trying to hammer out all the components of, I don't know, a sight word lesson. that we do different things connected to it. One of my students who she determines when we're done, we have a 50-minute segment that I don't think we've spent the whole 50 minutes and I don't know how long. But, we look at, like today we were introduced to a new chapter of a book through an audio read using Readtopia. So we did that. The second thing we did is we looked at the text of the book. We talked about it. And then we did some responding to prompts. So some different kind of comprehension prompts of different actions that had happened and how that character might feel. So in the context of, I think we were 35 minutes, we did 4 different activities, all building around the same kind of theme. Oh, and Melanie says, what I said about symbols are for talking or comprehension, letters are used for reading and writing. Dr. Janice Sturm says it much more eloquently than I do. But it really, I think that's it. Symbolated text was something that so many of us did. And if you realize that when I say so many of us did, it was the 80s and 90s. Like that's how long ago that was a practice. And yet, and we started learning about in the early 2000s when Karen or David were saying, we could teach people the wrong letters to spell a word by just putting a picture there, and they could see a picture of a giraffe and the word elephant can be underneath it and they'll still call that word giraffe because they're still too focused on the letters. And I think, really early, people didn't want to make that shift and companies didn't make the shift with their products. And so I think that many of us are just forcing it by stopping to use some of the products that are the completely symbolated text or only using the non-symbolated versions of those products. And Paige, I do not have the answer to that because companies are producing what they think their customers want and customers are following what the companies produce. So it is chicken and the egg. There is a group of educators who do a lot of things on Teacher Pay Teacher and have their own site. And one of them is symbolated text. And I will tell you, 2 weeks ago, I wrote to them and said, why are you doing this? There are certain products that they create that I love. And then I look at these other things and I go, but this is symbolated text. This is like, we've known since 2002 that we should not be doing this. And it's just hard. It's a hard habit to break. Because I think people think it's pretty and they like it and they have all of these books that they've done. And I mean, if you talk to Maureen Cummings from Michigan, she'll show you. She had a garage full of books that were symbolated text that she spent time doing, like all the MinSpeak symbols, and then she had to trash them. And it was the hardest thing to do was to trash them because you didn't want to give them away to unsuspecting people, because they would start using them. And it is hard habits, man. But that's a big one to break in literacy. So that's why the idea with writing, pick a topic, kids talk about their topic, put a picture on the page, and then use letters to write. And then you can keep referring them back to the picture of that car or whatever it is that they wanted to write about. I have a student that wrote about Subarus the entire school year of last year, except for like 4 times she wrote about something else. But she, and she found more ways to write about the Subaru car that she loves. But we always had a picture, but she used other letters and she used other words.
Hell, I have a Subaru and I would write about it all year long.
The girl loves a Subaru, let me tell you.
Well, everybody, we really do appreciate you spending some time with us today and staying past the top of the hour. That was wonderful. I will drop the link one more time in for the handout, just so that you have it. I did put it in throughout. So there's the, wait a second. There's the link. So you have it one more time. I will also post the recording up to our project's YouTube channel. I will send you an email to everyone who registered with the link back to it, and I will add the link to the handout in there as well. Kelly, thank you very much. It was
You're
awesome as
welcome.
always.
I feel like I need to say like all these individual hellos. Jen, Tammy, thanks for
hello to
joining us,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. It was good seeing everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kel.